This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. This is Razib with the Unsupervised Learning podcast. And today I am here with Noah Smith, who has a very prominent Substack. And Noah's been around the internet, and also he was with Bloomberg News for a while. Before that, he was an economics professor. He trained as an economist. And, one of the things that he's known for is being a big fan or a participant in some ways, I think, in Japanese culture. I think you live in Japan some of the time, Noah, right?
Yeah. I've lived there about 4 years and then go back about a month out of every year.
So you're a trans-Pacific. You have a trans-Pacific lifestyle.
Bi-coastal?
Yeah, there are two coasts there. Because otherwise you're in the Bay Area. So I guess like the first thing I want to start out with is Japan's going through some political turmoil as we're recording. They go through. This is my understanding. They basically almost always have the same political party in power, but they circulate through prime ministers relatively fast. Although of late, that's been a little less common. I think like Shinzo Abe was in power for a while. And, there was the guy with the long hair, I forget his name now. He was in power for a while too. So there are some personalities that are big. And right now, there is, at least in the American media, a depiction that there's a resurgence of, right-wing politics in Japan, whatever that means, in large part because of immigration, which is something that you have brought to people's attention in the Japanese context, because the stylized fact in the United States, until very recently, was Japan was a nation of no immigration. But you have surfaced the reality that actually there are a non-trivial number of non-ethnic Japanese that have moved there relatively recently. So can you kind of set the stage for us, like what's going on? Why are there, it's like the whole anti-migrant thing that's in the developed world. It seems to have touched Japan, or at least that's what we see in the media.
Right. So, for a long time, Japan allowed very little immigration at all. Not zero, but pretty little. And then in the 2010s, Japan's economy slowed dramatically. People think that Japan's economy basically has been like stagnant since the 1990s. But if you look more carefully, it was really in the 2010s that demographics really fell off a cliff, and that the ratio of young people to older people really collapsed. And then Japan started, losing competitiveness in essentially every industry, every tradable industry, because of lack of labor. And, basically there were labor shortages everywhere. So they said, all right, we're going to bring in foreigners. And Shinzo Abe you can think of him as the Japanese Ronald Reagan. Really, the parallels are pretty close. He's known as a conservative guy, but did a lot of things that were, in effect, liberal and had a liberalizing effect on the nation. Actually, more so than Reagan. Shinzo Abe campaigned for women's employment, and women's economic status has really been just, Japan's traditional sort of sexism has been rapidly disappearing as a result, partly of a big government push by Abe, and the other thing was immigration. A lot of sort of online agitators would tell you that Shinzo Abe is a Nazi and like they couldn't be further from the truth. Shinzo Abe was the champion of Japanese women's equality and diversity. So he did that. And then part of that was bringing in Chinese students who were going to like go there, work a little while, and then go home. But then people got pretty dissatisfied because those people couldn't really speak Japanese, and because there was massive turnover. And because the students really weren't very good at anything and didn't really care about working well and blah, 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 and were just, like there for a couple of years. And so they made a guest worker program, and they actually had a path to citizenship with a guest worker program. So it was a real immigration program. It wasn't just like you come here, you work, we kick you out, right? It was like you come here, you work, maybe you can stay. So it was a real immigration program. And at the same time, they decided they need foreign talent. So they did a high skilled immigration program, basically fast track permanent residency and expanded like employment visas and things like that, similar to what we do. but actually easier. So it's easier to be a high-skilled immigrant to Japan than it is to America by quite a bit now. And if you want to become a citizen of Japan, it's just as it's the basically copy pasted from the American system. So you go there, you get fast track permanent residency. You can get in as little as a year. You can get permanent residency in a year in Japan and be a citizen after 5 more years. In 6 years, you can be a citizen of Japan. You can just go do that as long as you speak Japanese. Not a ton of high-skilled immigrants took Japan up on that proposition because Japan's corporate system made it very hard to get ahead quickly. Entry-level workers were hired at very low wages, and their wages and promotions were determined by seniority as they went along. But so, and also there's a language barrier. English is an international language, Japanese not so much. And so they had trouble getting high-skilled immigrants, but low-skilled immigrants came in fairly decent numbers, and from Vietnam and the Philippines especially. Filipinos mostly care workers, and then healthcare, and then Vietnamese people, basically everything else. And so most immigration was not from, the Middle East or South Asia or Africa or whatever. Most of it was from countries that were, in the same region as Japan, and where you couldn't necessarily tell the difference between those people and Japanese people on the street. Like if you see, Vietnamese immigrants to Japan on the street, you can't necessarily tell they're Vietnamese. It's sort of like getting Polish people to immigrate to America in 1910.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, I think I've read some of your posts on that, and so basically, I think one of your arguments that I remember was because so many of them are from the Philippines and Vietnam, to an American looking at a street scene, they just assume they're Japanese.
Right. They just
and so it's
homogeneous country. Also, Chinese tourists, of which there's a ton. Everybody assumes they're Japanese too. If you're from America or something, you look at the people. Oh, Japanese. Look, they have black hair.
Well, but Japanese are pretty famous for historically being pretty insular in some ways. Obviously, with the Meiji Restoration, it shows that they can adapt to outside ways, but they have a very distinctive culture. They have this animistic ethnic religion, Shinto. So there's a lot of things about them that are very particular. How is it working with the new immigrant groups that have different cultural traditions? Because here in the United States, people assimilate to things like apple pie and sports. There's certain things you assimilate to. In Japan, how does that work?
Well, people massively overestimate the degree to which traditional culture plays a role in the regular lives of Japanese people, and to which, traditional culture is important. Samurai, geisha, to her, ancient, blah, 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 blah. And then that's not real. That's not real. Yes, old things had an influence on modern things through a long chain of causality, but in terms of keeping the old ways, there's just a couple little things that, sometimes people know how to pray at a shrine, but there's not a lot of ancient culture in Japan. It's a very modern country. And people don't necessarily understand that. Essentialism is less powerful as an explanatory theory than people think. But Japan still has a ton of cultural stuff that's highly unique to the country, and that foreigners don't necessarily fit in with, politeness, trustworthiness, just respect for other people around you, and all these things that, and following rules. Just Japan, Japanese culture is really defined by rigorous rule following, and that's a big deal. And so it's, people don't necessarily immediately assimilate to that. And one thing is that Japan's education system, which allows lots of international schools, is set up for the idea that foreigners are guests. Ironically, this makes assimilation harder. So if you take sometimes there are foreigners who put their kids in Japanese school, a lot of them from Taiwan or Korea or something, will put their kids in Japanese school, and they come out with a slightly different name and a somewhat slight ethnic minority consciousness, but they act Japanese and they're indistinguishable culturally from Japanese people, and so they get along very well. But and so if you do this to Vietnamese people, their kids, assimilation happens through kids. When we look at American assimilation, we look at the generations. We look at how not people who came from Poland behaved in 1910, right? You're looking at how someone whose name is I don't know, Malachowski is behaving in 1965. Okay. And so when you look at Japan, this large scale immigration began just a little more than 10 years ago. So you're not looking, it's not an apples to apples comparison. We're comparing how fresh off the boat people in Japan are acting relative to fourth generation Americans or whatever. It's not a comparison. And so, America, foreigners act foreign, but we're a freer country with lots more room to spread out and a much more informal culture. So it's not as big a problem. Like people come from like India and act as if they're in India, but that doesn't bother Americans because like, you like what? You see some guy at the store buying stuff? Like it's when you actually see the people, like maybe there's a little bit of conflict in like the PTA or something. But there's very little conflict, and the Haitians aren't really cooking the pets. That was made up. And so you don't get a lot of that conflict, but in Japan you do. And so now, there's stories about Vietnamese crime that are going around, Vietnamese people stealing stuff. And then, there's even some like Muslim areas where Muslim immigrants, like just a few, you're talking about like a few thousand, right? But like in one little area. And then you hear like the muezzin calling people to prayer. Japanese people are like, well, that's bothersome. That's bothering people. And so you've got cultural conflict there, even with just a few people. And so you've got, so you have things like that going on, like these cultural conflicts. And you had this with Brazilian Japanese people who are ethnically Japanese. They, their faces, genetically, they're Japanese, but culturally, they're very Brazilian. And they, were much more prone to like fighting or whatever. And so they were sort of herded into ghettos and eventually paid to leave in like the 2000s. And so we could see that with some immigration subpopulations. We could see Japan decide, oh, it's a mistake, and try to reverse it by paying people to leave. We could see Japan try to move toward more active assimilation policies like what they do in Denmark and like what America used to do. And so we could see those things. It's not clear how this is going to end.
Well, actually, so in America, obviously, as you say, after 4 generations, there was an idea of the melting pot, and its fullest elaboration was during the Ellis Island period. But in some form, it was around before. I mean, for example, there were a bunch of Germans in the United States in the 18th century, that came because there was the joint monarchy with Hanover. And Ben Franklin would talk a lot about that. Not always a big fan of them. It was a huge conflict in Pennsylvania. Eisenhower's descended from that batch, right? So Americanization is a thing that happens. Acculturation is a thing that happens. As you said, there's 10 years into it. But can people in Japan imagine a future where somebody who looks, I don't know, South Asian or European or something like that, or Latin American, would be ethnically Japanese? Or not? Ethnic is not the right word, but culturally Japanese, maybe.
Right. So, I think people haven't, the country hasn't really reckoned with that question yet. I think, back in the 2010s when I saw immigration start, I went around asking people, so suppose there was someone from Russia, suppose 2 people moved to Japan from Russia and they had a kid here, and the kid's name was like, Sato Takeshi or something incredibly generic, right? And then Sato Takeshi looks like a Russian, goes to Japanese school, speaks only Japanese, doesn't speak Russian, et cetera, is a citizen of Japan, et cetera, et cetera. Would Sato Takeshi be Japanese? And about half said yes and about half said no. And then I followed that up by asking most of those people, what would other people say? And the people who said no said that other people would agree with them. And the people who said yes said that other people would agree with them. So when Japanese people find out that they're not of a single mind on this topic and, realize that people disagree with them, there's going to be some fights. There's going to be some disagreement over the meaning of what it means to be Japanese. Is it nationality? Is it culture? Is it language? Is it ethnicity? Is it, appearance? Is it like, personal history and background? What is a Japanese person? And that's going to be a big debate. And people haven't had that debate. And one reason is because Japanese people just don't have as many political debates as America.
Yeah, really quickly, can we just... So in America, we have 2 parties. In Britain, they have 3, but really 2 major parties. So you have these party systems in a lot of countries. Some countries, like in Russia, you have a fake party system where basically it just rubber stamps Putin. Japan has a real democracy, from what I understand, but with the very few exceptions, I think there is a socialist party in Japan,
Yep.
And there's the Buddhist party in Japan that's for, I think, with Sakai or Nichiren Buddhism, whatever. But mostly it's the Liberal Democratic Party is the party that's run Japan pretty much the whole period after World War II. and this has been like this my whole life. I remember people talking about it in the 1990s like it was some weird thing. It's still the same, right? It's just they have a consensus-oriented politics that's qualitatively different than the United States, or not. What would
Japan?
you say to that? Yeah,
I wouldn't say they have a consensus-oriented politics. What they have is a single dominant party that most of the time wins. Occasionally it loses, but it usually wins. And that party, what that means is that leaders are chosen via internal party elections. But it's not a consensus situation. So Takaichi barely beat out Koizumi Shinjiro right now. And elections are highly contested, but the fighting goes on behind closed doors, kind of like it did in America back in the caucus days. And because of that, you don't see a lot of the fights that happen. And so, if you have stereotypes of Japan from reading like The Chrysanthemum and the Sword or something like that, or from World War II fascist propaganda that Japan put out themselves as wishful thinking, then you might think, yeah, these guys are consensus based. They just like follow the leader. They all agree. But if you look, there's actually incredibly vicious fights, as was true during World War II, even though the government tried to hush it up. In some ways, Japan ends up being less consensus based than America.
wait, in which ways?
Well, the concept of the silent majority, I'd say, is stronger in Japan because people don't argue about politics as much. People are less confrontational, but that doesn't mean they have consensus. It just means they quietly vote against the thing they don't like. It's like they don't argue with you and yell in your face, but they never agree with you, and they never stop resisting you. And if you go there and you say, oh, there's not a lot of people yelling in each other's faces, it must be a consensus-based society. It's not. It's just that, you have a lot more silent majoritarianism than you do in America.
I see. Well, okay, so you mentioned Sanae
These are all generalizations,
Takaichi.
obviously.
Yeah.
There was a consensus-based mechanism in Japanese companies. So Japanese companies for a long time tried to do this thing where they would like get all the workers to like consult on all these business decisions and stuff like that, a little bit like they do in Germany, but more informal. But then they kind of dropped it because it wasn't very efficient and it went away. But sometimes people do like try consensus-based mechanisms. In general, though, Japan is much more hierarchical. In general, Japan is much more a follow the rules society than everybody agrees society.
I see. Well, okay, so you alluded to, as we're recording, the front runner to be the next prime minister is Sanae Takaichi, a woman who I don't, nobody in America knows who she is aside, until like the last couple of weeks as we're recording. So apparently she is some far right wing bomb thrower is how she's being characterized. And there is a
Characterized by
movement in
Deep Razib.
I don't know, just like media, the New York Times,
Did they?
Yeah, that's what I know her from, and supposedly she's trying to
chapters
moderate.
online say shit, but then like, the New York Times, it said like, who is Sanae Takaichi? It says that she's conservative, but then says she's breaking down gender barriers. She had this educational background. She's one of a small number of women. She's a critic of China. She's a staunch supporter of Abenomics. Basically, it says she's conservative, but at no point did it characterize her as a right-wing bomb thrower, and I haven't seen that in the New York Times.
So okay, do you think she would be analogous to Maggie Thatcher, or is that just just like some sort of propaganda campaign or something like that?
No, it's just sort of like lazy, like, oh, first female leader, conservative, who's another first female leader who's a conservative we can think of off the top of our heads. She would not. Because Thatcher was, sort of hawkish, but Thatcher's main policy was economic. She privatized things. She made it easier. Like she loosened labor laws. She did things like that. And I don't remember if she cut the welfare state or not, actually. But I know she made it like she loosened labor laws and privatized a lot of industry. That's similar to Koizumi Junichiro, the guy with the hair. That's him. He did that.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
not much of that left to do. She probably would, want market discipline for some companies, like, outside shareholders to like hold companies to account. But I think we're sort of past that. We're in that phase already. Like that's already been done. And that was Abe. I think Takaichi would focus more on industrial policy for defense purposes. So I think she would be actually less free markety than Abe or Koizumi was.
So I mean, she was because she's a China hawk. Like she wants to rearm Japan. And so what is this? I mean, so Japan, you're saying it's there's a silent majority. I mean, there's a way that Japanese kind of come to some agreement. And my understanding is, when you look at polls, people don't really want to rearm. They want to keep the defensive stance of its armed forces as opposed to being a geopolitical, force projection, that sort of thing.
Right. So what you have to understand is that in America, we have all these culture wars over, like, in the past, it was like abortion and gun control and the death penalty. Now it's like immigration and trans stuff. Right. And what are our other big culture wars besides I guess DEI. Right.
Yeah.
Maybe
Race.
DEI. Yeah. DEI, immigration. But I think immigration and trans probably the biggest. Right.
Yeah.
And then so in Japan, all the culture wars are wrapped up into one thing, which is the military. It's like every single culture war. I mean, I guess there's also nuclear power. That's like a culture war. But it's things you wouldn't think of as being a culture war in America because it's just so orthogonal to the debates that we have. But you have to understand, Japan was a fairly liberal democracy, fairly liberal and fairly democratic in the 1920s. And then in the 30s, the military took over. And what actually happened is a little more complicated than that. There were a bunch of right-wing coups, and the military took over in part to stop the right-wing coups. But the military was also right-wing in a slightly different way. But that's a long story. And the story is that when the military took over, Japan became a fascist totalitarian society. They tried to, they made rapid progress toward becoming one, and a lot of that happened over the course of the war. But then some of that happened before the war, and dissent was criminalized and cracked down on, and et cetera, all that standard stuff, right? And so that happened in like the 30s and 40s, early 40s, right? And then people don't want that to happen again. Basically, people don't want to see their freedoms taken away. They don't want to see, stuff like that. But then other people care about, national pride and things like that. And the debate over the military is a lot more about nationalism and pride versus individual freedom than it is about actual policy, like we need to deter China or stuff like that. And so for a long time, the people who wanted more individual freedom, Japan is an extremely free country, in some ways more free than America. You can drink alcohol outside, that you don't have just recently they introduced a social security number, but for decades and decades, like Japanese people resisted it because it was government surveillance, intrusion on privacy. Government restriction of press freedoms is really, really frowned on. And so essentially, Japan's a very free country and people value their individual freedoms, but they think they see the military as the biggest threat. And for a long time, essentially the individual freedom side just won. They won all the culture wars, and the right-wing people just lost again and again. And now, because policy is starting to become important again, because the United States protection for Japan is starting to withdraw, right, after all these years, because America is collapsing into sort of internal fights. And because American power is sort of in a state of collapse under Trump, finally they're going to have to get serious about their own defense again. Policy is running into culture wars. Culture wars making it very difficult for rational policy to get done. And so this is the issue in Japan.
So I mean, do you think though, is that the Japanese will eventually change their tune when it comes to the military and militarization?
Yes.
Okay. It's just basically it's a matter of time.
When Taiwan is taken over, they will change overnight.
Okay.
And they'll go nuclear.
Yeah, because they already have they have the human capital to do that really quickly.
And the technology, they have it. They could do it like tomorrow. But they have refrained from doing it for obvious reasons. But and nuclear stuff is an even more nuclear culture war, shall we say?
Yeah.
It's really tied in with the whole military thing. It's like the nuclear issue and the military issue are not really different, which sounds weird because who in America would think that like nuclear power and defense policy are the same thing? But in Japan, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so the minute Taiwan gets conquered, Japan, rearms to the teeth overnight as best it can. I think that's my guess. And people that I talk to in the Japanese government generally agree with that. But right now, all this stuff is still very hypothetical, very distant. Whereas people have been trained to have these culture wars their whole life. in Japan. And so now I will say that Abe, quote unquote, reinterpreted the Constitution to allow a very significant amount of rearmament and even first strikes on enemy bases. So, in fact, there are relatively few legal barriers left to militarizing Japan. There are problems such as the weak yen makes it difficult to import components for defense manufacturing. And Japan has let its defense industry atrophy for many years, and will have to rebuild that, possibly with the help of Americans who aren't able to build stuff in our own country, so may need to go to Japan to build drones and missiles and things like that. So I am looking for companies like Anduril. I think that they would be extremely well served by building in Japan. And so I think that will be important, and that's what my next Japanese language book is going to be about.
Wait, so you're writing books in Japanese?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
what's that like?
It's cool. I get to go to Japan and do book tours. And I think my first book, Weeb Economy, which is about foreign investment, has been pretty successful. And a lot of people read it. And I taught them the word weeb, too, which they didn't even know.
Wait, so Japanese didn't know the word weeb?
They didn't.
Wait, so weeb, in America basically means people, Americans or non-Japanese who are kind of obsessed with Japanese culture, right? It's like a whole... Yeah. It's a whole community out there. Actually, I will say...
Not just America, but the world, too. I mean, weebu is how they say it in Indonesia.
So I wrote a post about Japanese genetics, it was 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago.
Ooh, great poster.
And it was...
I love that poster.
Got a lot...
It basically showed that Japanese people were about I don't know what, 45% like Manchurian type and 45% like Korean, and then like the rest very...
Yeah, that's about right. Yeah, you're close enough. Yeah, that's basically. So there's like 3 components, and there's Jomon is the oldest, and then there's like the Manchurian type, and then there's like a newer like rice farmer type. But it was funny because I got a lot of new subscriptions, a lot of new signups, and people were like, "Oh, it's like I didn't know Japanese people like read it." I'm like, they weren't Japanese people. I saw the names, but there were people quite interested in the history of Japan who were not ethnically Japanese.
Right.
So I mean, basically, I just got a massive weeb lift off there.
Did anyone tell you that the Manchurian type ancestry and the Korean type ancestry correspond to 2 things called sauce face and soy face?
No, I don't know about this.
If you Google, actually pull up Google Images right now. Okay. If you're in front of a browser, and
I am.
Right, sauce face, soy face. Soy face means something very different in Japan than it does in America.
Okay.
Can you see what I'm talking about? So sauce face is going to have more Northeast Asian, Mongol, Manchu ancestry, while soy face is going to have more Korean ancestry. And that's just what that is.
So it's softer.
The soy face
it's a softer face. Looks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's so weird. So I was curious, so there's this whole weeb thing, but more recently, there's been, K-pop has become big in the United States. Like really, there was a J-pop, I think, a little boomlet, I think in the late 20th century, but that kind of faded. But K-pop has become really big. What do Japanese think about the ascendancy of Korean culture of late? Do they have any opinions on that? Or are they whatever?
That's an interesting question. So when people say, I would say Japan's racism is largely directed at Koreans traditionally. Most Japanese racism, I mean, Japanese people have stereotypes of various people, but not, their relationship to Korea is very special and was bad. Whereas, so it's interesting because Korean people got hit with the stereotypes that Westerners would hit both Black people and Jews with. So they, Koreans were thought to be at once, they were big, strong, dumb, and will hot but hot and will take your girlfriend, right, on one side. But then also on the other side, they were crafty, cunning, sneaky, secret, and control all the media and the financial system. Okay, so they were imagine if we only had one minority and we had to use the Black template and the Jewish template for both of them, and we just put it all into one minority. And so they did.
Okay, yeah.
And it was really, Yeah, and so that looking at that made me think that maybe there's just this very inelastic demand for racial stereotypes, and you apply those stereotypes to like whoever you got. It's like
Yeah.
let's find the big dumb sexy guys, and let's find the like shafty, crude, cunning, sneaky guys, and let's we only had one minority, let's make them the same guys. And anyway,
Yeah.
but when there was conflict between Japan and Korea around 2010, a conflict over these islands that Korea now owns that Japan used to own, called the Dokdo Islands in Korea and the Takeshima Islands in Japan. And there was also a big wave of Korean pop culture sort of taking over Japan and giving some people anxiety, etc. And so there's this big anti-Korean backlash around 2010 to 2015. People don't know this. But it was like this big reaction in Japan. And I heard, I heard some racist stuff from a few people. And then a hate group materialized called the Zaitokukai. And when Japanese hate groups march, they don't use dog whistles. There were just signs that said, "Kill all Koreans." Like they were serious. Like, and then, of course, leftists and assorted libs and some Koreans came out to like fight them. And I actually got to see a shoving match between these two sides at a protest in, I forget if it was 2013 or 2014. I think it was 2014 when I saw it. And I went because I went to Japan like every summer in those days. And then I think that was the summer that I saw, I could look it up. But then, there was a shoving match. It was like sort of like, Proud Boys versus Antifa, Japan style. And Abe, this guy who all the like stupid like gaijin foreign commentators on Japan say, "Oh, Abe's Hitler, to her." Abe passed Japan's first hate speech law, threw the head of the hate group in jail, and banned their demonstrations. Again, Abe, liberal, Japan's most important liberal leader of all time.
Okay, and just so people know, Abe, we have to say in past tense because he was assassinated, right?
He was assassinated, but that was over a funding scandal with a cult, and it was not over any of these policies.
Yes, crazy people
in fact,
be
it wasn't
crazy
even about him personally. He was just a prominent LDP guy who didn't have good security.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like a lot of these societies that like have low violence rates, like people are, even in the United States, we don't have low violence rates, and as we know, with the whole Charlie Kirk thing, just crazy people can do things. They can just do things.
That's right. I mean, the Charlie Kirk guy did seem politically motivated, but then the two people who tried to assassinate Trump very ineptly did not. They were just random wackos. Like they were not very politically motivated. And then they echoed the two crazy people who tried to kill Gerald Ford in 1976.
Oh yeah, people forget that.
Eerily similar sequence of two assassinations where the first one missed like very just barely, and the second one couldn't figure out how to use their gun. And like within a month, it was like the same. History rhymes, man. That's crazy. And so, especially because I've been saying in the sequence of like the 2020s and the new 70s, I've been saying that 2024 was 1976, and that the fact that we had those two assassination attempts that were so similar was kind of interesting. But anyway.
Yeah. No, but so actually, let me let's because we were talking about like American politics at some point. Let's pivot to that. So let me ask you. The whole Charlie Kirk. I actually, I know you said some stuff, but I'm kind of curious about your take. So I will just I think some of the list. I think I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast, partly because I don't talk about politics all the time. But I was in touch with Charlie, not Charlie Kirk himself, but a producer, a friend of mine, and we have been talking for a long time about me going on the show, talking about genetics, like maybe going over his genetics, Charlie Kirk's genetics. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But so, I'm kind of on the edge of people that know him and knew him. I didn't know him personally. So, some of the stuff that, came out about him and, how he's viewed, it was to me, it was like culturally interesting. I would say I'm a little biased because I have friends that know him and that talk to him and that met him. And so I have a more positive view, I guess, even though he's a very different type of conservative, if I would call myself conservative, than I am, obviously. But also he was pretty young and he's changed a lot. He changed a lot over the last more than a decade that he was in the public eye. So there was a lot going on there. And I know privately, conservatives, like, their upset is not just a public show. Like, it's Charlie Kirk. A lot of people, like, to give a concrete example, like someone said, well, they just killed JD Vance's vice president. Like, okay, this is not necessarily was not penciled in, but this is the kind of figure people in conservative circles view Charlie Kirk as, potentially. So it's kind of a big deal that he, was assassinated. And then you had, Ezra Klein and Ta-Nehisi Coates were talking about, how do people on the left engage with Charlie Kirk and all his death, and is there going to be like more violence and counter reactions, and all the anti-wokeness stuff with frankly, some of the Republicans are going a little crazy and unhinged, like, thou shalt not say Kirk's name in vain. So a lot has happened. I think a lot of fodder for someone like you to comment on, actually. Like, what is your general, like, overall reaction to this, to the moment we're in right now?
Well, I think we have a real problem with, so I think that what I've learned since 2014 is that social unrest in a country is a macro variable. It is a thing that happens to a society as a whole, rather than a thing that's necessarily caused by specific things, or limited to certain sectors of society, or limited to certain topics. I've learned that when a society goes into a state of unrest, it's pervasive. It's everywhere. It's about everything. And I don't understand the laws of unrest. I've always been a person who shies away from describing, just making hypotheses about, grand hypotheses about, sociological processes and political stuff. But what seems to me, reading about past periods of unrest, you could think the French Revolution was one, the period leading up to the American Civil War was one, the 1960s and early 70s were one, right? And so you see these, or also the late 1910s and 1920s were a period of unrest.
The first Red Scare.
Yeah, the Red Scare, but also you had you had the KKK march, 500,000 KKK people marching in Washington.
Yeah.
And the KKK taking over whole towns. You had a massive wave of lynchings. You had race riots in hundreds of American cities. I mean, everyone knows the Tulsa one, but that was just one of hundreds. Tulsa, everyone knows Tulsa because they used a plane. They used a bomber on Black Wall Street, but that happened all over America.
Okay.
And so the 1920s, you had serious genocide scares about Catholics. You had these newspapers saying the Catholics are going to genocide. You have to prepare to genocidally fight the Catholics. This resurgence of this anti-Catholic idea stuff that hadn't been really prevalent for a long time. And all these things sort of exploded at the same time. The union, fights between unions. Anyway, all this stuff. And then it went away over a while. But what you see in all these periods is two things, I think. Number one, most people calm down and walk away, while the people who remain politically engaged become more and more insane and extreme. And it's evaporative cooling. Have you ever heard that term applied to this?
Not applied to this, but I think I see what you're getting at. Can you elaborate, though?
Yeah. So evaporative cooling of a liquid is where the hottest particles preferentially escape first, the highest energy particles, let's say. Hot can only apply to a collection of particles, but let's say the highest energy, the particles that are zipping around the fastest get away because they transcend the energy barrier to be able to escape. But statistically, that leaves the remaining particles cooler on average, which means, or less energetic on average, which means the remaining liquid is cooler. So as the liquid evaporates, it cools because the particles that would make it hot escape first. And with group beliefs, it's the people who are the most normie leave first, which leaves the crazies there. And it not necessarily the exact same process, because with group dynamics, there's probably an interaction term. People interact, and so the amount of craziness among the crazies who remain can probably increase. There's probably some synergistic nonlinear effect there. But similar principle, which is to say that as the normies filter away, the politically engaged sphere becomes more and more extreme. So now like look at Blue Sky, it's just insane leftist stuff. It's totally insane, but small. Twitter, I would say American Twitter is also shrinking. They keep the
slowly
numbers.
but surely.
Yeah.
Slowly but surely, it's clear.
And the people on Twitter are more nuts than they ever were.
Yeah.
And the people just mainlining politics as their hobby are insane to the point where they're going to go out and shoot somebody. Whereas your average person is no longer arguing about politics over the water cooler, arguing about politics at Thanksgiving. Like the average or posting about wokeness and shit on Facebook. Like that era is done. And if you look at, Musa Al-Gharbi, but also like the Financial Times just came out with a thing, and like, or Jonathan Pallesen or whatever that European dude's name is. They're all coming out with all these time series that all show the exact same thing. Everything you measure says that wokeness has mostly subsided among the general populace. But also, like, I would say rightism, like you don't see the Proud Boys marching anymore. You don't see this right-wing street activism, the 2%ers or whatever, or the Oath Keepers.
The Bungalow, was it? There were a lot of weird movements in like last 5 to 10 years ago.
That's right. Yes, there were. And so yeah. And so I think that you're seeing like calming down. General calming down in the nation. But at the same time, you're seeing a hardcore of crazies become crazier and crazier and harder core. I think that's one of these after effects of this age of unrest that we're just starting to pass out of. I think we're seeing these nut cases.
Yeah, I think part of it is, I know that despite you using social media, you're not a fan of the effect that it's had on our culture and some people. And I think one of the things that happens, you mentioned Blue Sky, which, even whether it intended to or not, has become a haven.
I've never been on Blue Sky. I've never been on Blue Sky.
I'm on Blue Sky. So Blue Sky sometimes has scientific papers that are interesting because like a lot of scientists went on Blue Sky. But then like a third of the content is about Jesse Singal. So it's like, what's going on there?
Totally moronic.
I mean, Jesse Singal needs to get residuals from Blue Sky for like how he looms large as a figure in the Blue Sky world. Most people don't know who Jesse Singal is, but on Blue Sky, he's kind of like the big boogeyman. And then you also have right wing, some of these far right bubbles where it's just some of the stuff is really it's so non-normie that they forget that most people don't know these memes, they don't know these dog whistles, and like there's a whole world out there. But as they become more and more purified, they develop the in-group language so that they can communicate to each other in this to the outside world in esoteric code. And I think that is causing some issues with kind of a drift of certain small subcultures away from the stabilizing, moderating effects of mainstream. And I think it's like enabled enabled by the way social media technology and like the way the internet works. Internet used to be great for like small communities, like I don't know, like quilters or something like that. Right. So I mean, it's good for these small communities. So I think that's what's happening to political extremism and like these like marginal movements.
Right. I think that's exactly right. And but people like young people are starting to use social media less, like mass social media, and a lot of them don't have it. The overall numbers mask the severity of the decline because they count Discord and WhatsApp as social media, whereas what young people really aren't using is using less is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, anything that's public, where people are messaging more and posting less. The idea of a life lived online, a life lived in public, in full view of everybody, has been tried and has been rejected. We had the digital streets. It's like, we've done this in the physical world in some ways, to a much less degree. We've tried this where we have like street movements. In the 60s, you could go to all these like Vietnam War protests and live this life in public where all these people could see you. And it wasn't like Twitter, but there were opportunities for lots of attention. And I think that at some point when we get, probably AI driven, but it'll be a serious when we seriously start to study social phenomena in a serious way, we're going to discover that attentional processes and status anxieties are key to the ages of unrest. That status, that status resentment builds up in a society over time naturally because hierarchy is more rigid than people's ambitions allow for. You'll notice when you look at cancel culture, you look at who was actually getting canceled. It was people who were clogging up the top ranks of management in the way of ambitious young people who were reaching for whatever levers they could to cancel their superiors, to get them out of the way, because you had all these smart people who had all these degrees, right? Or, all this ability. And then you had these old people who would come in and monopolize this, the entertainment industry or the science academic departments, or basically every organization in society. They monopolized those, those sort of, or they got in positions of power back when it was easier to do so, but also back when there were like a lot more young people, like the boomers. And so then these young people come up, this bulge of younger millennials comes up, and they all want in, they all want access, they all want upward movement, and they can't because being blocked by these old guys. And there's of course a mismatch where the old guys are old white guys who, when they think of like who I'd like to hire, they probably are more likely to hire young white guys who look like them and look like all the people they've always seen get hired. So yeah, there's discrimination in there somewhere, like, so that they're not going to hire like the young, like Persian woman or whatever. There is that going on, but that's not all that's going on. A lot of it is just that, people were ready and anxious for a turnover, and you had this big generation without much growth. You didn't have a lot of growth, right? You didn't have a lot of economic growth, and most of the institutions and organizations of our society were built out in the 90s and 2000s. You roll around to the 2010s, and suddenly, like, you have all the quilter societies, you have all the anime message boards, you have all the science fiction conventions. There's not, and the economy is growing slowly, and economic dynamism is way down. You don't have room for for positive sum growth in status. And so you got all these talented young people who spent their whole life taking tests, getting degrees, blah, 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 and they're blocked. I think we're going to discover that that's what triggers an age of unrest, because I think you see the boomers in like the 60s, and I think you see a lot of the same thing.
I mean, is your argument here very similar to Peter Turchin's, elite surplus argument? There's just like 100%. Too many.
It's not exactly similar, but it is very. I got this from him, and then I modified it a little bit.
There's just not enough slots, so you gotta free up the slots.
That's right.
By any means necessary. And like, some of the, even when it's not older people, like some of the cancellations, I know. So I mean, just I know. David Shore was on this podcast. Like, I think it's pretty clear that I know him. And Li Feng was on this podcast, and it's pretty clear I know him personally. I know them both personally. And I know a little bit about some of the inner workings or the background of their cancellations and who was canceling them and why. And it's not all the stuff that you see on the surface about, how they're like racist or sexist or whatever. There's power politics back there that kind of uncoiled and just like used these new cultural tools to get rid of rivals. I mean, or attempt to get rid of rivals, right?
Yep, big deal. Yeah.
And so when people see a new tool, they're gonna use it. But I think we've had the vibe shift now. Now they're talking about like right-wing cancel culture. I don't think that it's quite equivalent, because a lot of the institutions like journalism there's just not that many conservatives in it, So right. it can start working the same way. It's working more top down. But are you surprised at how quickly the vibe has shifted though? From say 2020, 2021 to like now?
No.
Okay.
So the reason I'm not surprised is because what happened was that there was a peak of unrest in 2018 that was already starting to ebb. And then COVID and the Floyd protests reinvigorated it and made it really like massively overreach much more than it had before. And then that was so overdone that the snapback was always going to be pretty quick, especially because pressure had already been building up to just everyone shut up about politics and stop with the excess wokeness kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Biden was elected, I think, partly because a lot of people, including I know a lot of, I know people who are Republicans who voted for Biden because they just didn't want to talk about politics. They didn't want to think about anything. And they just wanted to, like, the whole, like, the first Trump term was characterized by a lot of just, like, these culture wars and, just like all of this agitation constantly. And a lot of people were exhausted by it. And so I think that, I know people who voted for Biden because they just wanted return to normalcy, and a decline in wokeness would be part of that, right?
Yeah.
And so now we are in the second Trump term, and we don't talk about like the econ stuff, like you've already talked about the tariffs and stuff. But what do you think? I mean, we're not even a year into it, and I feel like so much has happened. Do you think that Trump and the Trump movement can maintain just this sort of like metabolism for like even another year? I mean, because like I think the midterms, a lot of people assume the Democrats will take charge. At which stage there's going to be probably another investigations and other things that are going to go on. But there's more than a year left before the midterms. Like, do you think that Trump is this metabolism is still going to continue? The stuff with ICE.
What do you mean by
There's
metabolism? Can you explain that to me?
I just mean like there's always something big going on. There's always like some new activity, some new action, some new controversy that is roiling the culture. So, like for example, there's immigration, there's the tariffs back and forth. There's stuff going on with Israel. There's stuff going on with Palestine. There's stuff going on with the rollback of DEI. There's stuff going on with judges. There's stuff going on with the imperial presidency. I mean, there's like a lot of fractures that the Trump administration is pushing on. And, I knew that some of this was going to happen because I know some people in the administration. I know what they were planning. They were planning on going whole hog on all of these things. That's what they said. I think a lot of people thought like you're not going to be able to do that, but they are trying to make success, right?
They are trying now.
But I mean, we're basically like, this is not, people like to say, oh, like this is not normal. Yeah, it's not normal. It's like a lot is going on politically, and we just had Roe v. Wade was overturned. We don't even talk about that anymore. That was supposed to be like a huge thing, and then basically affirmative action is being taken apart piece by piece. Like it started at the universities, but it's going to affect government contracts and other sorts of things. And so like there's a lot of changes that are happening through executive fiat, and I'm honestly a little surprised at how little opposition has come from the left or from liberals about this sort of stuff. I have no like hypothesis of what's going on there.
Well, I think, I'm not really a political commentator, and I don't have a ton of, I wouldn't put too much stock in my thoughts here, but I think that what's happened is that the broadly defined left, which includes the Democratic Party, normie libs, super woke people, and sort of like socialists, leftists who are still pining for Hugo Chavez, like the broad left is in a state of collapse and internal dissent. And part of that is Palestine, because Palestine basically provided Jews were one group of people who never, you could cancel Jews for being white in during wokeness, but then Jews would be like, well, I'm not quite white, whereas like 10 years before they'd be like, yeah, I'm white, duh. But then during wokeness, they'd be like, please don't cancel me, I'm not quite white. And then but then you could cancel people for being Zionist, quote unquote, in the Palestine purge. And then, so there have been articles written about how there were a lot of Jewish people in the sort of progressive establishment or Democratic Party who are now being sort of pushed out. It's a little bit of the push out kind of thing. So you had that. So you've got basically a giant conflict of Jewish people who realize they're being attacked versus, young people who see an opportunity to get some turnover by attacking quote unquote Zionists, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What are you saying?
Yeah, I'm actually, I know you've commented on, the whole Free Palestine movement. Again, like I'm not like part of the left. I don't really have those connections, but I'm a little surprised at how much traction it has had and how it's overwhelmed all the other, like climate justice, that sort of stuff. And where are the pro-choice rallies, or where's the general environmentalist stuff going? It's like all about Palestine now, which is, I don't really get it, just because
All Palestine.
look, it's been part of our life. It's been, Israel Palestine has been part of our lives, for like decades. But now it seems to just have like maximally absorbed the whole left's passion. I don't, look, I don't know if there's like some secret cabal of the left where they just decide we're going to go all in on Palestine. I don't know what they're going to do going forward, because as we're recording, it looks like the Abraham Accords are like going to be expanded, and Hamas has basically agreed to a ceasefire where they're gonna, the future plan is they're gonna probably leave Gaza. We'll see what's going on, but I don't think that the Palestinian movement. I mean, Israel is arguably in a stronger geopolitical position than it was 2 years ago. So I don't really understand like how they're feeling right now, aside from dejection. But it seems like they're still moving forward. They're still talking about Zionists and marching. Yeah, I don't know. I don't have deep thoughts on this, but it's just like something I observe as a bystander, and I just like don't like get it in terms of like why all the energy is on this one thing that's been around for like since the 1940s, you know. But now it's like got new relevance. I don't know. I mean, the percentage of Jews in Israel is the same as it was 30 years ago. Arguably Israel is in a like stronger geopolitical position. So I don't know. I mean, I've read some stuff about like Students for Justice in Palestine. It's like some sort of movement in the United States that has these chapters all over universities, and it's trained a bunch of people. So is this more a thing that's not about Palestine, but more about like the left needing some sort of like ideological shelling point? I don't know.
I think so. I mean, if you ask any of these people, they'll be like, no, it's just about Palestine. Here's the thing. I care about the thing. They think about it at a very object level. But as for who has told them to care about the thing, who has paid attention to what they get rewarded for caring about, and all these other sort of things that end up making a difference, I don't think they could really like. It's arrogant and condescending for an outsider to say, here, no, what you really care about is this, because people want to think that what's the important thing to them is what they consciously think about and care about, right? And for them, that really is Palestine. They really think that it's a genocide. They really they think all the things, and they think Zionism is this evil, ideology sweeping the world and blah blah blah. But, go back a few years, it was neoliberalism, but now it's Zionism. Zionism is the great evil in our world, and so, the great Satan.
But on the left, from what the polls are showing, that has a lot of traction among young liberals.
A lot of traction.
I mean, this is going to be. I mean, the Democratic Party. So I do blame Netanyahu somewhat though, because I remember like 10 to 15 years ago, Netanyahu was aligning with the Republicans very explicitly, negative polarizing the issue, and maybe that was like good in the short term for his political career. But I don't think it's good for Israel to have a pro-Israel party and an anti-Israel party in the United States, because most of our adult lives, there have been two pro-Israel parties, which is good for Israel.
Right. But so, that time is ending. The Democrats are going to become a lot more anti-Israel.
Yeah, and like some of it is just like demographics. Like a lot of the younger non-white voters in particular are much more sympathetic to Palestine and Palestinians for various reasons. I see it on Instagram some, honestly. Like it's just people share the pro-Palestine stuff on Instagram all the time, but otherwise these are not people who share much political content at all. So for some reason, this is like a signal about who you are and what you care about. But I don't really get the sense that they actually really want the peace process and the two-state, that they're thinking about things like that. It's like some sort of it's a symbolic thing, and I don't know like how it came to be that this very concrete international affairs policy became kind of embedded in the social identity of a lot of people. I don't know. It kind of like how gay marriage became a big deal for a lot of progressive Americans, I think, 10 to 15 years ago, but that's at least a concrete policy that affects the United States. It's a little strange to me. Like if America was like 30 or 40% Muslim, I'd get it. If you're like a Muslim in Dearborn, I get it. But we're talking like, I'm from Oregon. I have a lot of friends on Facebook. I check in like once every week or two. And, a lot of people are like young progressives in that part of the country. They post like the Free Palestine stuff and they talk about the genocide in Palestine, but they have no connection. They're not Muslim. They have no connection mostly to Jews. So it's just like something outside of their ken. And I don't know where this is going to go.
Right.
If the energy is still going to be there, because I think like a lot of American Jews are pretty worried because, traditionally Jews have been Democrats. That's their party. And so, to have a party that's anti-Israel that they're in, like that's not the best feeling, right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And at some point, you push that far enough, you will see an exit of Jews, but it's going to be a long time before before something like that happens, you know?
Well, I mean, yeah, actually, like Republicans have been waiting for a long time, but the reality is, you wait long enough, something will happen, and we already did see to some extent at the level of like party officials or operatives where there's been somewhat of a demographic turnover. Let's just put it that way over the last 5 to 10 years, and I mean, if you look at Obama's speechwriters, okay, like I mean, he straight up said this. It's like it's just a bunch of Jewish guys, you know.
Yeah.
It was mostly like his um his brain trust was like a lot of Jewish guys actually.
Okay.
Whereas like if you look at Biden's speechwriters, a lot of women, a lot of minorities, et cetera, et cetera. So over the last 15 years, there's been like a demographic shift, and so I think a lot of people are trying to figure out like if they have stakes in this party or in this movement anymore. And Zionism, as you said the word Zionism. Zionism is kind of like a dirty word in certain corners, which is weird because
Not kind of like it's a massive.
it is Zio. They say Zio, right?
The
Yeah,
Zios,
yeah. And so I mean, I
spiritually
don't really.
Israeli.
It's what?
Have you heard the term spiritually Israeli?
No, I have not heard that term.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well,
what is that even supposed to mean?
it just means like I hate you so much you're an Israeli.
Yeah, I wonder about that because like I have Israeli friends in academia in the teens, and I asked them if the BDS stuff like had hit them. They said everything was super chill, but I'm not sure if they would say that now in 2025. It seems like the temperature's really, really gone up.
I don't know that the temperature's gone up now from where it was before, but I think that ideas have had an opportunity to percolate more widely,
Yeah,
which is to say that I think in 2023, you saw people like, or 2024, you saw Jews getting like beat up in universities in America. Like
yeah.
if you wore like a yarmulke or
It would get in your face. I saw that.
Jewish symbols, they beat you up, and that's not happening anymore. That's done.
Yeah, yeah,
The violence, and then the like witch hunts for like who's a Zionist are done. That's all over. However, the general diffuse the idea that Zionism is this bad thing that needs to be opposed, that the Gaza war is or was a genocide, etc. This stuff has diffused more widely, and since then, it's like it's not as intense. You're not going to get beaten up or like fired from your job for being a Zionist, and you're not going to get beaten up in the streets for having Jewish stuff on you anymore. Like that's done.
yeah.
And then the sort of the online anti-Semitism is starting to ebb a bit.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely see that. Although I have to say, as we're recording, Nick Fuentes just got done with a New York tour, and look, I'm not like a big guy of like, oh, you shouldn't platform certain people, but it is a little weird because Nick Fuentes has literally said pro-Nazi things, which is like, I think in our culture that was kind of a red line. You can like flirt with certain things, but if you go full Hitler, you never, and like I'm sure that the Groypers, would be like, oh, he was never a Nazi, but I mean, he said some stuff, trolling or just joking, which is just like no in terms of like the Holocaust. And now he's on Red Scare. Glenn Greenwald interviewed him. That was the first thing I noticed. Glenn Greenwald interviewed. He's like on some like left wing podcasts as well. He was on Dave Smith's show. I don't know Dave Smith very well, except from like whatever, like clips that I see. But these people have a lot of traction. They have a lot of distribution. And so Fuentes I know he's moderating, but still, to me, that's a little weird. Like I would never have, it's not weird. Like I'm shocked. Like I didn't think that would happen. Like that was a rehabilitation that I was not expecting.
Of Nick Fuentes.
Yeah, because it's like, I don't know. He's a troll. I don't know. Maybe I haven't watched him enough to get a sense of like, his
Bro is an
depth.
absolute troll.
He's a what?
He's an absolute troll. The dude
Yeah.
he's just a complete troll.
And so I don't really, again, like I tweeted this out. I was like, how is he getting so much mainstream attention now? Like what changed, I know he talks like some crap about Trump and Israel still. Maybe that's part of it. But
So what happened with the Palestine stuff is that Jews went from being a group that the left, the broadly defined left, will rise up to protect, to a group that is outside the aegis. So you can bash Jews as a right-wing guy now, and nobody's going to like denounce you, and you're not going to get fired from your job as long as you just say something about Israel. You know, it was about Israel. And like, it's safe. It's safe to bash Jews now. Even if you don't say anything about Israel, even if you're like Hitler, blah, blah, Hitler, Hitler. And like the idea, like the lefty people aren't going to cancel you for anti-Semitism because people are trying to cancel them for anti-Semitism right now for being anti-Zionist. And so nobody's going to stand up against anti-Semitism, even if it's just like traditional, like Nazi anti-Semitism. And so essentially it's open season on Jews. Jews have lost they've been kicked out of the rainbow tent. The pride and power flag no longer includes Jews.
Yeah.
And so they are no longer a protected group. Now, if you attack trans people, fatwa, attack Muslims, attack trans people, attack black people, of course. And then, interestingly, it's not clear whether Asian people are still under the aegis or Indian people are still under the aegis.
Well, I mean, we've talked about this, like, privately.
I didn't see people on the left standing up against the anti-Indian hate much.
Yeah, well, I don't. It's just kind of ignored. I think. I mean, sometimes it's not ignored, but mostly it's like, I mean, it just kind of came out of nowhere. Like, it seems to be like a little bit coordinated. I don't know how organic it is. So. Like there was a thing about like Indian doctors or something like that, but the reality is Indian doctors have been around since the 1970s.
Yeah.
No one has a problem with Indian doctors until like literally like 3 weeks ago, right? So I think a lot of this stuff, like you don't know you don't know like how much of it exists outside of Twitter. On the other hand, Twitter or X. On the other hand, what is online eventually does get into reality now, just because like the memes get into policies, and a lot of the people in the Trump administration, a lot of the young people in the Trump administration, they grew up online, and a lot of the young people in the next Democratic administration also will have grown up going online. So I think saying, "Oh, it's just online," doesn't work anymore. Online is just real life and vice versa, right?
Not necessarily. So I think that that was true for a while, and now you're starting to see a separation again, where
see
evaporative cooling. I think a lot of the people walk away from politics. Like if you'll talk about politics sometimes in your Discord or sometimes in your WhatsApp group, just like people used to talk about politics around the water cooler or in their house, dinner parties. Like but it's not. You're not engaged. You're not very engaged, and online versus offline is now becoming a shorthand for engaged versus not engaged. Like if you're glued to like X every day, fighting the latest race war, defending Hassan Piker for torturing his dog, or whatever the hell, right?
Yeah.
Screaming about the latest anti-Zionism thing. If you're engaged, you're called online now. Everyone's online, but if you're politically engaged, you get called extremely online. That's a relic of the early days of like the 2010s, when the people who were engaged were online because they were engaged, and engaged because they were online. Now everyone's online, but not everyone's engaged, but we still use the word online.
Yeah. Well, I mean, also, this is kind of weird, like tangent, but so I got familiar with dating sites very recently, like I had never used them. And so, my friends would tell me, "Oh, well, you didn't use them 10 years ago, so you don't know, like it was so much better." And my hypothesis for what happened is people use the apps, not the sites, but the apps. And as they get better at optimizing on the individual level, it trashes the utility for the aggregate. So, like, men just started swiping like crazy. Women are overwhelmed by the number of incoming. And so they stop paying attention. And so like the men have to like swipe even more. And so like these online social systems seem to gradually kind of like decay in their utility as people get better at gaming them. And once it's gamed, it's not as natural anymore. You don't get as much utility out of it. That's my opinion. I think like that's happened also in social media to some extent, and other forms of information technology that we use.
Yeah, I think that's about right.
And so, we'll find something new. Like Instagram, for example, still has a fair amount of traction among the youth, but at some point there's going to be too much slop, and I think that they're going to get tired of it. There's going to be some new thing that they're gonna raise to. So there's always some new thing, and then like everything else is over. Like, I mean, if you ever log into Facebook, it's just like weird. This used to be, there was like The Social Network, the movie. It was such a big phenomenon, but it's like a ghost town now with basically senior citizens. It's super weird.
Yeah.
It's a total has-been. It's basically like I only have a Facebook account because it's what I log into things for. I do have to say email I think is still a little bit relevant because for certain official things email is still good. Even though there's a lot of spam and stuff like that. But
Oh, yeah. But
it,
Facebook
yeah.
has lost relevance. It's a boomer ghost town. That's fine. Instagram will probably become a millennial ghost town, and Twitter's becoming a millennial ghost town. Like, there's not Zoomers on Twitter.
No.
You talk to Zoomers, they're like, Twitter? I don't use that. I don't use X.
Yeah, they don't have a Twitter account.
No,
they don't have a Twitter account.
Certainly not Blue Sky. But like,
No,
they don't have any of those dunk apps. The dunk apps are for dunking, and people don't want to spend their life that way.
Yeah, well, they know what happens if you become if if you become like what the internet is talking about for a day. It's happened to like so many people in the older generations. So like they people do learn. They are learning how pernicious some of these technologies are, and they are slowly just starting to wean themselves off it, including obviously like a lot of these tech people, like they're keeping their kids off social media, off technology, et cetera, et cetera. Like people know what the problems are and they're adapting. So we are adaptable. I mean, that's a positive thing. It's not like we're going to be like overwhelmed with, just like information. Like we're just going to tune a lot of it out. I think that's what's going to happen to the slop, which, by the way, how are you feeling about, the accusations? We're both on Substack. How are you feeling about the accusations of Substacks being overwhelmed by slop? Have you seen it?
Substack slop? No.
Yeah.
But I'm sure it exists.
I mean, my thing is like, I think
Substack, you mean slop, blog slop or
yeah, like that. Yeah, there's some, but I mean, I think that it's people like you or me who use our faces and already have our identities. I don't think we're doing slop. I think like there's just these anon accounts or something like that producing generic content.
I love Sora slop.
Yeah. I mean, like I don't. I'm not a big fan of short form video or video in general. So, but I don't. Yeah. I mean, it's the problem with Sora slop though is like now I just don't trust anything that's a video. But maybe that's not a problem because like there have been multiple things which turned out to be true, and I just assumed it was AI generated, and then later I see like an article in Wall Street Journal like, oh, that thing was true. So it's like, I don't. Again, like real names and real identities are actually quite a bit more relevant to me now because I know that most of those people will at least try or make a pretense of not just like making things up with AI. If it's an anon, I don't. You know what I'm saying? Like it's very, very difficult. I don't retweet. I don't know if you've noticed this, like on top articles of like what your followers have shared. X doesn't have enough data for some of mine. It's like, oh, they're not sharing enough articles anymore. We know why that is because they penalize links. So it's like the whole environment is changing over time to become stupider and stupider and stupider. And the evaporative cooling is definitely happening over there, right? Some of the biggest accounts are just like total slop. I'm always blocking them. I don't know what your strategy is. I'm always blocking them. They're not like mendacious, but they're just like, okay, like I don't care about this video or this like, Wikipedia history of Prussia in the 18th century. It's like, okay, I know what's going on here, So I don't know. I mean, I think we're adapting, and so I'm optimistic about that. Overall, though, I know you've had some concerns with the economics and all that stuff, but like, I mean, are you optimistic about American power, or do you think we've already lost to China? Yeah.
Well, it's a question of what lost means.
Yeah.
Right. Have we been conquered by China? No. Does China tell us everything to do and what not to do? No. Is China the boss of the world? No. Is Chinese power in the ascendance and America's power is rapidly waning in the world? Of course.
Yeah.
That's right. And this is a choice by mostly by the political right. The political left, the Democrats, managed to fight off the internal factions that wanted a diminishment of American power and importance in the world. And the political right did not. The Republicans did not manage to fight off that challenge, and that challenge succeeded. And the people who think that America needs to retreat to the Western Hemisphere, and not even to the Western Hemisphere, but simply to America itself, we need to retreat within our borders so that we can settle our race wars internally. Those people won the debate. And they lost the debate in World War II because Pearl Harbor was bombed, and because people really, really didn't like Hitler, and because Britain was getting bombed, right? Like Britain, our our parent civilization, I guess, was getting bombed by the Nazis. But there is no such like the isolationists who wanted to like sit around and like settle all the conflicts from the 20s, all those racial conflicts and religious conflicts and all those roiling unrest that had been gripping America in the 20s. A lot of people wanted to just sit within our borders and settle those. You know, Charles Lindbergh gave the America First speech where he said America should restrict itself to the Western Hemisphere because this will allow us to settle our own conflicts, internal conflicts. And those forces have now won. They lost in World War II, and they won now. And what that's going to mean remains to be seen. Now, I will say that Trump has been more engaged in the Middle East and in a more constructive way. I mean, he dropped like 2 bombs on Iran, but basically resisted the pressure to like enter into a major war in Iran. And, you know, using Kushner, his one effective person, he really did broker a ceasefire in the Gaza war. And that was a very consequential and important decision. And so that's been pretty constructive. And in Ukraine, we've basically stopped helping Ukraine, but we haven't cut them off either. And, you know, Europe will hold out against Russia. Like, I think it's clear at this point that Russia will try to overrun Europe, but will fail. And how much carnage is involved there is still up in the air. But I think Europe is anti-Russia and united against Russia to the point where Russia is not going to be able to like divide and conquer Europe. And you know, Ukraine is not falling. They're making a shit ton of drones and just stymieing the Russians and then bombing the Russians' oil facilities. And like, you know, they're not collapsing at all. They haven't drafted young men yet. So that's still like an ace card to play, to like draft a big army of guys. And they're just making drones as fast as they can and just stopping the Russians from advancing. That's what they're doing. So, yeah, like honestly, I think it's not over yet. The Trump administration still makes noise about wanting to deter China. It's the world where like the new axis just wins and Russia rules Europe and China rules Asia and, you know, Iran rules the Middle East and then America retreats within its borders to like beat up immigrants. That's the caricature of where we are. And directionally, we're a lot more toward that direction than we were a year ago. But we're not there yet. We're not near to that being the reality yet. So it ain't over till it's over. And you know, the Trump administration is starting to realize the responsibilities of actually having power. You're not just a, you know, dissident force on X yelling about all the shitty immigrants anymore. And the nation is not being satisfied. We're not experiencing a needed catharsis and release from ICE rampages, right? It's unsettling people. It has not tanked Trump's popularity, but it has reduced it by a significant amount. Trump's anti-immigrant force. And you saw the same thing with anti-terrorism stuff under Bush, right? Like at first people were like, get him, get him, get him. And then people were like, oh, you put people in jail without trial. You sent people to Guantanamo. You spied on everybody. And you put guys with machine guns in every airport. Like over time, unease pushed back, right? And then Bush fucked up. He fucked up with Katrina. He fucked up the economy. He fucked up the initial part of the Iraq war anyway. And those fuck ups cost the Republicans dearly. And the Democrats got their shit together under Obama. You know, the Democrats really coalesced in ways that were not necessarily durable, a durable coalition for government, like a permanent coalition for governing. They didn't get their shit together nearly as much as they did under Roosevelt, right? That was like a multi-decade dominance thing. But like they didn't get their shit together that much under Bush, and they could have, had they been stronger and more competent, more unified, and had a better idea of what they wanted. They could have, but they didn't. They used the Bush fuck ups like with some degree of competence, but not with the Franklin Delano Roosevelt degree of competence. And yet, it remains to be seen whether they'll do that now under Trump, whether the Democrats will get their shit together, you know, whether they can move past Palestine stuff, whether they can backpedal on enough of the 2010 stuff. And by the way, the hardest thing to backpedal on, they're like, the hardest thing to backpedal on by far is going to be trans stuff, because most, like Black people want police in their communities. All right. And Black people are, pretty lukewarm on the idea of affirmative action, DEI type racial preferences, right? It makes most Black people like kind of uneasy. Like they recognize that it'll benefit them, and they recognize that like someone thinks they're looking out for them, but on the other hand, uh, it makes them uneasy. And also, Black people do not want anarchy. They do not want looting of stores that they shop at and work at. They do not want, their neighborhoods turning into anarchic no-go zones, right? They don't want that. They want cops to protect them. They just want cops not to beat them up. And so because of that, it's very easy for the Democrats to moderate on issues that are of concern to Black people, on Black people issues. The Democrats will never throw Black people under the bus, but at the same time, you haven't seen a huge pushback against the end of affirmative action. And you haven't seen a huge pushback against the end of DI. You haven't seen defund the police is dead as a doornail and has been for years, even under Biden.
Yeah.
And, Biden was like putting more cops on the street. And so that's done. But on trans stuff, Democrats are not going to retreat anytime soon because Democrats really do see trans issues as the civil rights movement of our time, as a protected group that has not received its full protection, canonized and enshrined in law and, and custom. Trans stuff, Democrats are not retreating on. They do believe that retreating on trans sports teams or retreating on pediatric gender, affirming blah, blah, blah. They think that those two issues, those are the two big issues, right? It's like sex segregated spaces. Like, can you have women's sports teams that are segregated by biological sex? Can you have prisons that are segregated by biological sex, et cetera? That and the pediatric gender, puberty blockers, basically. Those two issues, Democrats are not retreating on. And nor are they retreating on any of the language and stylistic things of like, AOC removed her pronouns from her bio. So maybe that's a slight retreat. So maybe there's some of that stylistic stuff. But the whole idea that like self-ID is the one single definition of who's a woman or a man is not, there's no retreat on that. No retreat at all. Even though the majority of Democratic voters would like a retreat.
Yeah.
And so that's something I worry about. I have stayed away from trans issues. I don't have a dog in the fight. I don't honestly care that much in terms of my personal life. Like, it doesn't affect me. I just don't. I fundamentally am not invested in it personally. And I just take a libertarian attitude of like, do what you want. But it has become clear that this is a big sticking point, and that Democrats are not retreating, and that Democrats base with, Democratic voters would like them to retreat, and it's hurting Democrats probably. What should be done? I don't know, because if you believe that this is the civil rights struggle of our time, then popularism doesn't matter. It doesn't if this is slavery, if this is modern slavery, modern segregation, whatever, you don't retreat on that, even if public opinion's against you. You stick to your guns, you hold the line, you stand up for what's right again and again until you win, until public opinion changes and you win. Gay marriage too, right? Like, public opinion was against gay marriage, but gay marriage was the right thing to do. And so, and I assert that unequivocally. You can argue if you want, but
the thing with the gay marriage though is like that monotonically got more and more popular.
Yes,
right?
yes,
as people thought about it. With the trans stuff, there's evidence from the UK and the US that's not happening. Actually, that there's been regression among some of the youth.
100%. And so, and I agree that things may turn out differently. Like, I don't think that the long arc of history always bends toward democratic social movements succeeding.
Yeah.
All I'm saying is that the modern Democratic Party was built off the civil rights movement.
Yeah. So I would say the issue that I've always had with like this aspect since the late teens about like the Democrats' idea about marginalized groups is that the marginalized groups, like that category, brackets together individuals and groups that they're qualitatively very different. So like race is not like gender, is not like socioeconomic. Trans is not like being a homosexual, like there's some deep differences here. But the Democrats, a lot of times, their gloss is, no, there's just like, this is just, trans
Everything
people are
is
just
MLK.
like black people in the 1960s.
Everything is MLK.
Yeah. And it's I mean, like a lot of black people would say, well, it's a little different because, it's a ascriptive identity, in terms of like, you can't usually pull a dolazol, where it's like trans is by nature fluid. And that's actually part of some of the definitions with non-binary and gender fluidity and all these. So it's like, I think the problem the Democrats have is that they're trying to argue within frameworks that the general public, frankly, just doesn't buy. I think the general public, whether you think so, the argument about gay marriage from a conservative perspective was like a marriage is between a man and a woman, not a man and a man, or a man and a woman and a woman. But all of the arguments were clear and distinct about what was going on. Everyone understood.
Right.
With the trans stuff, even like, so we, as we're recording, Abigail Spanberger running for governor, she was asked about, sex segregated sports, and she kind of just like babbled a bit. The issue is like the Democratic elites themselves cannot like articulate very crisply, at length what their thinking is. They just know they have to stand with these people. And then like, if you push them, what I see is like, they don't really have that clear of an idea compared to, say, with like gay marriage. It's like, okay, well, what happens if you're with someone for 50 years and then they're in the hospital and you can't see them? These are all very, very simple things to explain to people. Like the argument, whether you agree with it or not, is they get the same rights that you already have as a straight person, right? That's a very simple, clear, cogent argument. The argument with Black civil rights is they have the civil rights that white people have.
That's
equality, right? With the trans, though, you have to redefine what most people understand to be gender. And that's just a big lift, right? And I don't know why, just Democratic elites just will not acknowledge that they're trying to do something fundamentally different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. They don't have multiple templates. They don't have subtlety and nuance. And the trans movement, which is to say lots of activist groups, are very, very powerful within the Democratic Party. Democratic staffers are all in on the idea that if you say I am a woman, you are a woman.
Yeah.
And they're completely all in on this idea. Progressive culture has completely embraced this idea entirely. If you exist within progressive circles and you say that someone can say I'm a woman but not actually be a woman, you become ostracized within those circles. In the broader, I can say online, I can say, like Leah Thomas, the swimmer, is not actually a woman. I can say that. I'll get some people screaming at me on Blue Sky. I'll get, attempting to ban me from Blue Sky, even though I'm not there. Preemptively ban me. And I'll get a few people screaming on Twitter. I'll get a couple hate mails. I might lose a friend in the real world if I said that. But wouldn't lose my job. But if you are at a university and you stand up and say Leah Thomas is not a woman, you're fucked. Your career's fucked. If you are at an NGO and you stand up and say Leah Thomas is not a woman, you're fucked. Your career's fucked. And depending on what company you work for, there are some companies in which your career is fucked and some companies in which it's not. And I'm not saying this is bad or good, because what I'm saying is that this is the way it is. In progressive circles, the norm of, like self-ID is the definition of whether you're a woman or man. That is not questioned and is not to be questioned. And you cannot question it, or else you suffer horrendous personal consequences. But in the wider culture, it hasn't taken. It is a subculture. It has been confined and contained.
Yeah.
Most people in America are probably going to say Leah Thomas is not a woman. But if you say that at a university, your career's over.
Yeah. Well, and we're a little. You're an elder millennial. I'm a younger Gen X, so we're Xennials, right? So trans people, we used to call them transsexuals. They've been around for a long time, actually.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's not like Americans were like, put the trannies in the cage and burn them. It was just like they were seen to be kind of outliers, deviants, whatever. You could use whatever word you want to use. But Americans are, in a lot of ways, when it comes to their personal mores, are pretty socially libertarian. Like if you don't get in someone's face, they'll just be like, okay, whatever, do whatever you want to do in your own life. I might like look at you askance a little bit. The problem is, from my perspective, is with the trans stuff is, it is actually asking people to change their views on something that they intuitively think they already understand.
Okay, that's not entirely unprecedented, because, for example, the civil rights said that it's not just that Black people have the same rights as white people under the law. It's that if I have a cafe and I want to say no black people in there, just privately, and there's no law about it, it's just me not wanting black people in my cafe, I can't do it, right? You get sued under the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and you have to let black people in your cafe. And so people said, that's infringing on my right to have my cafe with who I want, freedom of association. With gay marriage, people were like, I'm not baking a wedding cake for you. That's wrong. That's morally wrong. A marriage is between a man and a woman. And yet here came the Supreme Court and said, no, you got to bake that cake, man. You got to serve gay people equally, And so that, and being gay is something you can't fire people for. Like, you could fire people for being gay in like 1945. It's fine. You couldn't, sexual deviancy, moral turpitude, you'd fire them for that, right? Then you can't fire them for being gay now. And so, like, what you could do as an individual was restricted by these successful civil rights movements. And I happen to agree with what we did to restrict those rights of people to, like, ban black people from their cafe or I agree with these things. I'm not sure about the wedding cake issue. That's kind of, I don't know, minor, but a lot of these things, like, I say, yes, to enforce full participation in society, we did have to restrict, like, rights. The idea of you can do whatever you want so long as it doesn't hurt anybody else. In practice, it's always like one person thinking they're hurt versus another person thinking they're hurt. And you just have to decide, you just have to adjudicate which hurt counts and which hurt doesn't count, right? You're never actually not hurting someone else, because it turns out that anything you do, you can wear a sombrero on Cinco de Mayo as a white person and someone says they're hurt by it, right? Hurting people is subjective. And because of that, you can't the libertarian maxim of do whatever you want so long as it doesn't hurt anyone else doesn't always hold.
Wait, I will say though, I will say, like, comparing, like, Katie Herzog at Blockchain Reporters talked about this, comparing, like, say, so the queer movement where the trans are included in. The difference though is, like, if you're homosexual and I'm like, well, you're not a homosexual, you'll just laugh. You're like, it doesn't matter what you say. Like, I know what I am. Whereas with the trans movement, the perception, whether it's true or not, is that they do want validation by, like, the pronouns and the accommodations and everything like that. They want to be, like, the social perception of you when you transition is part of the whole thing, Whereas, like, if you're a gay man, you're gay man. It's just, you can say whatever.
Acceptance, isn't being able to walk into, like, a proudly Christian, like, cake shop and say, make me a cake, I'm gay. Isn't that demanding that people recognize you? Isn't being able to, like, as a black person, walk into a cafe full of, like, Southern good old boys and say, like, hi, serve me, I get to sit here. Isn't that demanding that society recognize you in some way?
Yes. But, like, I do think that, so like, going back to, like, the black example, that debate has been happening for 300 years in the United States. And so there's, like, a whole lexicon of, like, how you resolve this sort of, like, egalitarianism versus freedom of association. Like, miscegenation concerns, like, loom large throughout the relationship between black and white people in the United States, right? Whether that's licit or illicit. And so I think we have, like, a pretty, and, like, Christian churches themselves have a pretty big armamentarium of arguments and tools to address these sorts of things. With the trans stuff, I can tell you, a lot of boomers don't know which one is which, like, trans women or trans men. Like,
sure.
Like this has been put into people.
There is going to be generational turnover. Boomers will die and millennials will die. And the question is, when things settle out,
sure.
And I'm not sure they ever entirely settle, because I thought abortion was settled and it wasn't. But when things settle out, where will be the line that we draw? Like, where will people like Leah Thomas get to be on women's sports teams? Will kids get puberty blockers? Will murderers who say I'm trans right before they go to prison be sent to a women's prison?
Yeah.
And I don't know. The answer is I don't know. I don't know what, like, 30 years from now, assuming we're not all killed by the robots, 30 years from now, or nuclear war or a bioplague, I don't know. 30 years from now, if, like, I don't know where our society will be. I don't know whether the trans movement's current goals will succeed or fail, or whether they'll be replaced by other more popular goals after a backlash, and those will succeed. The gay movement, honestly, like, started out as a movement just for recognition and ended up as a movement for a concrete proposal of marriage. like that represents some sort of moderation for the gay movement too.
Yeah. Yeah, it took a strategy. The homosexual rights, the gay movement. Part of it was originally, as you probably know, like in the 60s and 70s, very radical movement, and then it kind of bourgeoisified itself in the 1990s in a conscious way. Like NAMBLA, for example, was actually at Pride marches in the late 70s and early 80s, and they were consciously ejected. North American Man Boy Love Association, right? They were purposely ejected. And so, the whole idea of gay marriage is like you give gay people the same rights as straight people have, the same access to that institution, right? And that was a very, very persuasive argument over 20 years. I think like whatever the Supreme Court did, I think it was probably inevitable on the national level because the logic was just so crisp and clear, and gays had already existed within society. In terms of the trans thing, I think one last thing I'll say about that, though, in terms of like, 'cause we're getting long on time, but I want to say, I lived in the Bay Area in 2008, 2009, 2010, and 2011. I was moving in rationalist circles, and there were some people who were trans in those circles, and it was not a big political issue yet. And back then, trans was literally transhumanist. So it was bracketed into a whole set of changes and modifications and a flexibility in terms of your human essence, your human identity. And that kind of has like fallen by the wayside because the trans movement in the teens basically became like, conventional identity politics kind of stuff. But I do wonder as technology changes and improves, I do think we are gonna probably the next generation confront what it means to be a human because right now we can
What if
say
you can just take someone who's trans? What if you can just take someone and put them in the opposite sex body?
yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of weird permutation. I would say weird, but yeah. Or for example, it's like there was a guy who like made
Honestly,
himself look like a
blockers
cat.
are the beginning of that, right?
What?
Puberty blockers are the beginning of it. It's a drug that you can give kids that will make their bodies somewhat less sex specific.
So I think the issue is children is always a special category, and I think the real issues are going to happen when things that you do to adults become really transformative. Because we have a really hard time in America saying adults can't do things.
Yeah.
When it comes to just like their surgeries and their modifications. So I think once that happens, I think we're going to have to revisit this in a much deeper way, but also in a more thorough way, because there are going to be people who are like, hey, I want to look like a tiger.
Right.
I mean, how are we going to feel about bipedal tigers running around?
Right. It's like I sexually identify as an attack helicopter. Well, like in the future, you can just be an attack helicopter.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like, brain uploads, those ideas. I mean, there's all sorts of weird ideas that were like science fictional or in the transhumanist movement 20, 25 years ago. Some of them are edging into like, okay, we can get, I mean, with AGI, the discussions that we have about artificial general intelligence, these are all old arguments. Now they're just like much more salient because of LLMs,
Yeah.
So, as I said, we live in interesting times. It was great talking with you, Noah. I'll put the link to your Substack, although I'm sure like everyone knows about your Substack. It's one of the top ones. Are you in the top 10? Are you in the top 10, top 5? Like, do you look at your ranking?
No, not that high. I mean, like more and more, a lot of the top ones are group ones.
Oh, okay.
So
yeah,
in terms of individual ones, I don't think I'm in the top 5 or top 10, but probably top 20.
Yeah.
There's a lot of categories, and like the politics ones are always pretty big.
Yes. The politics ones are big. People are interested in culture wars.
They love their culture wars.
Yeah, whatever. If I ever do a podcast that's more culture worry, like I see the I see the downloads. Like you say you don't want this, but I actually see what the downloads are.
Yeah.
Although to be fair, my listeners really like paleontology too. So you could have both. You could have your.
I have a request for a post from you.
Okay, let's go.
And that is, I want to know about the Malays because I was just in Malaysia.
Yeah. So I could do that. That is interesting because it turns out there used to be this hypothesis because like Hinduism and Buddhism were in Southeast Asia. There's these legends about these Indians, and it used to be people would say like, oh, these are just legends. It's just cultural diffusion. So now that geneticists have looked, it looks like there is actually a deep substrate of South Asian ancestry that showed up in Southeast Asia 2,000 years ago. And the legends are probably based on reality. And so Malays have a minority Indian ancestry that's actually quite old, along with like more recent Chinese and Indian. And so yeah, it's pretty interesting. Like their cultural background as like Hindu, Buddhist, and Muslim actually like are reflected also in their genetic variation, which was a surprise when the first results came back on that. But yeah, I can do Malays. I mean, it's and also like they're in an interesting geopolitical position, right? They got there's a lot there's a lot going there historically. And like the when the Portuguese first came to northern Sumatra and the Malay Peninsula, actually, they did encounter European colonies, like Italian merchants that were there. This is like little known, but those colonies were secret because that was like it was a trade secret in terms of how they were sourcing certain luxury goods from the Far East, because it wasn't a state
I
program.
want to hear more about this. Anyway, tell me. We don't have time to talk about this now. Tell me a lot more about this. Let's wrap this up.
All right. Yeah. So it was great talking to you, bro. And I'll see you around at SF next time.
See you around, man.
Bye.
This podcast for kids